Tonight, we'll take you on another quiet journey through time, into one of history's more brutal chapters, told gently so your mind can rest while the past unfolds. You wake up to the sound of your stepmother's wooden spoon scraping against the bottom of the porridge pot with all the gentleness of a gravedigger's shovel. The February morning air in Salem Village cuts through the gaps in your family's modest wooden walls like gossip through a congregation, which is to say, swiftly and with devastating effect. It's 1692, and you're 13 years old, which in Puritan Massachusetts means you're practically a spinster. Your name is Mary Warren, though most people simply call you that Warren girl, or the one with the twitchy eye. The twitchy eye isn't actually a medical condition, it's just what happens when you spend most of your waking hours trying not to roll your eyes at the endless stream of sermons, prayers, and general godly suffering that passes for daily life in this particular corner of God's green earth. The house smells like yesterday's cabbage soup and today's impending doom. Your father sits at the rough-hewn table, methodically chewing his breakfast with the same joyless determination he applies to everything else in life. Your stepmother bustles about with that particular brand of aggressive piety that seems to be the unofficial uniform of Puritan women everywhere. She hums hymns under her breath, which would be charming if the hymns weren't all about death, judgment, and the various creative ways God plans to punish sinners. "Mary," she says without looking at you, "Goody Proctor sent word. You're to help with the washing today instead of attending lessons." This is actually good news, disguised as a chore. Anything that gets you out of spending another day learning to read from the Bible, the only book apparently worth reading, according to everyone within a 50-mile radius, is a blessing. Besides, working for Elizabeth Proctor means you might actually learn something interesting, like how to properly card wool or preserve meat. Practical skills that don't involve memorizing psalms or contemplating your inevitable damnation. You pull on your woolen cloak, the same drab grey that every other girl your age wears, because apparently God finds bright colours personally offensive, and step outside into the morning that will change everything, though you don't know this yet. If you did, you might have stayed in bed and pretended to have consumption. The village is unusually active for such an early hour. Small clusters of women stand outside houses, their heads bent together in conversation. This is notable, because Puritan women don't typically gather to chat unless someone has died, been caught in adultery, or shown signs of witchcraft. Given that it's a Tuesday in February, witchcraft is the most likely culprit. As you walk toward the Proctor house, you catch fragments of conversation carried on the bitter wind. Found her in the woods, dancing around a fire, speaking in tongues, the devil himself. The pieces begin to form a picture, and it's not a pretty one. Though to be fair, very few pictures in Salem Village are pretty. The place has all the charm of a cemetery in a thunderstorm. You arrive at the Proctor house to find Elizabeth standing in her doorway, her arms crossed and her expression troubled. Elizabeth Proctor is what passes for a progressive woman in Salem Village, which means she sometimes thinks before she speaks, and doesn't immediately assume that every minor misfortune is God's punishment for insufficient devotion. She's also one of the few adults who treats you like a person, rather than a potential vessel for sin. "Mary," she says, "have you heard about the afflictions?" You shake your head, though you're beginning to suspect you're about to hear more than you want to know. "Betty Paris and Abigail Williams," she continues, "they've been taken with fits. Strange behaviour. The Reverend is beside himself." Betty Paris is the 9-year-old daughter of Reverend Samuel Paris, the village's minister and all-round bringer of gloom. Abigail Williams is his 11-year-old niece. Both girls are exactly the type of perfectly behaved, perfectly pious children that adults love to hold up as examples of what you should be. Apparently even perfect piety has its limits. "What sort of fits?" you ask, though you're not entirely sure you want to know. Elizabeth glances around nervously before answering. "They scream, they contort their bodies, they claim to see spectres, spirits of people tormenting them. She pauses, as if the next words are particularly difficult to say. "They bark like dogs." There's a moment of silence as you both contemplate this information. In a community where dancing is considered dangerously frivolous, Barking like a dog is so far beyond the pale that it's practically in the next county. Who do they say is tormenting them? You ask. That's just it, Elizabeth says, lowering her voice. They won't say, or can't say. They just suffer. You spend the morning helping Elizabeth with her washing, but your mind keeps wandering to Betty and Abigail. You've never particularly liked either girl. Betty is too serious and Abigail is too everything. But the idea of them writhing on the floor, barking like animals, creates a peculiar sensation in your chest. It's not quite sympathy and not quite satisfaction. It's something else entirely. By midday, the entire village is buzzing with the news. The doctor has been called. Dr. William Griggs, a man whose medical expertise extends primarily to bleeding patients and recommending prayer, has examined the girls. His diagnosis, delivered with all the confidence of someone who once read a book about medicine, is both simple and terrifying. Witchcraft. You're carrying water from the well when you overhear a conversation between two of the village's most prominent gossips, Goody Putnam and Goody Walcott. They stand near the meeting house, their heads bent together like conspirators. The doctor says there's no natural cause, Goody Putnam is saying. Someone has bewitched those poor children. But who? Goody Walcott asks. Who in Salem village would consort with the devil? They both look around nervously, as if Satan himself might be lurking behind the woodpile, taking notes. Could be anyone, Goody Putnam replies. The devil is crafty. He could work through the most unlikely person. As you listen to their conversation, something strange begins to happen. You feel a tingling sensation, starting in your fingertips and spreading up your arms. It's not unpleasant, exactly. It's more like the feeling you get when you're about to do something you know you shouldn't, exciting and terrifying at the same time. You think about Betty and Abigail writhing and screaming, the centre of everyone's attention. You think about how, for the first time in their perfect little lives, they have power. Adults hang on their every word, desperate to understand what's happening to them. They're no longer just children, to be seen and not heard. They're witnesses to the supernatural, conduits of divine drama. And you, Mary Warren, are still just the girl with the twitchy eye. That afternoon, as you're walking home from the Proctor house, you begin to feel strange. It starts as a slight tremor in your left hand, barely noticeable. But as you think about it, the tremor grows stronger. By the time you reach your family's house, your entire arm is shaking. Your stepmother notices immediately. Mary, what's wrong with your arm? You look down at your trembling hand as if seeing it for the first time. I don't know, you say, and the uncertainty in your voice is absolutely genuine. It started shaking, and I can't make it stop. Your father looks up from his Bible, because of course he's reading the Bible. Let me see, he says, reaching for your hand. The moment he touches you, you jerk away as if burned. The movement is instinctive, uncontrolled, and it surprises you as much as it surprises him. But the look of concern on his face, the way your stepmother's eyes widen with worry, it's intoxicating. Mary, your stepmother whispers, have you seen anyone who might have wished you harm? The question hangs in the air like smoke from a dying fire. You know what she's really asking. In a village where two children are already afflicted with supernatural torments, a third case of strange behaviour can mean only one thing. You're being bewitched. The tremor in your hand intensifies, and you're no longer sure if you're causing it or if it's causing itself. The line between performance and reality begins to blur, like watercolours in the rain. I'm not sure, you say, your voice small and frightened. But last night I had the strangest dream. There was a woman in black, and she was reaching for me with these long, cold fingers. You've never had any such dream, of course, but the words come so easily, so naturally that you almost believe them yourself. And the way your parents react? The sharp intake of breath, the fearful glances they exchange, tells you everything you need to know. For the first time in your 13 years of life, you are interesting. That evening, as the sun sets behind the bare February trees, you lie in your narrow bed and listen to your parents whispering in the next room. They're discussing whether to call the doctor, whether to speak to Reverend Parris. whether their daughter might be the latest victim of Salem's supernatural plague. You flex your fingers under the rough woolen blanket, and they obey you perfectly. The tremor is gone, at least for now. But something else has taken its place. A new understanding of the power that lies in being powerless. The strength that comes from appearing weak. Tomorrow, you think, you'll have to decide how far you're willing to take this. Tonight, though, you close your eyes and drift off to sleep, dreaming of cold fingers and women in black. And for once, the dreams feel less like nightmares and more like possibilities. The wind outside your window whispers through the bare branches, carrying with it the scent of snow and the faint echo of distant screaming. Or maybe that's just your imagination. In Salem Village, it's becoming increasingly difficult to tell the difference. You wake up to the sound of your own name being whispered like a prayer, which is both flattering and mildly terrifying. 3 days have passed since your hand first began to shake, and word has spread through Salem Village with the efficiency of a well-organized plague. You are now officially one of the afflicted girls, a title that comes with both prestige and the uncomfortable weight of constant scrutiny. Your stepmother hovers over you like a nervous chicken, checking your temperature with the back of her hand and asking repeatedly if you've seen any more spectral visitors. Your father has taken to reading Bible verses aloud at every meal, as if the sound of scripture might create some sort of protective barrier around the dinner table. It's touching, in a deeply exhausting way. But the real change is in how other people look at you. Yesterday you were invisible. Today, you're a prophet of supernatural doom. When you walk through the village, conversations stop. Adults nod at you with the sort of respectful concern usually reserved for war veterans or recently widowed ministers. Children stare at you with a mixture of fear and fascination, as if you might spontaneously combust or start speaking in tongues. It's intoxicating. This morning, you've been summoned to the Paris house to join Betty and Abigail. The three of you, along with a handful of other girls who have recently begun showing signs of affliction, are to be examined by a group of ministers and respected men from the community. It's like being invited to the most exclusive, terrifying club in Massachusetts. The Paris house is larger than yours, but it carries the same oppressive atmosphere of enforced godliness that seems to permeate every building in Salem Village. The main room has been rearranged to accommodate the gathering, with chairs arranged in a circle like some sort of theological tribunal. Reverend Paris stands near the fireplace, his face grave and his hands clasped behind his back. He has the look of a man who has discovered that his quiet little village has become the front line in a war between heaven and hell. Betty and Abigail are already there, sitting side by side on a wooden bench. Betty looks pale and drawn, her usually perfect posture replaced by a sort of nervous huddle. Abigail, on the other hand, seems almost energized by the attention. Her eyes are bright, and there's a slight flush to her cheeks that suggests she's enjoying her newfound importance. The other afflicted girls are scattered around the room like exotic birds in a hen house. Anne Putnam Jr., who is 12 and has always been sickeningly sweet, now carries herself with the dignity of a martyred saint. Mercy Lewis, a servant girl who is usually invisible, sits with her chin raised, as if she's posing for a portrait. Elizabeth Hubbard, normally as dull as dishwater, seems to glow with inner significance. You take your place among them and immediately feel the weight of expectation. These girls have been performing their afflictions for days now. They've perfected their craft while you're still learning the basics. You're the understudy in a play where the stakes are literally life and death. Reverend Paris clears his throat, and the room falls silent. "Girls," he says, his voice carrying the weight of divine authority, "we are gathered here today to seek the truth. You have been chosen, whether by God or by the devil remains to be seen, to witness things that most of us cannot see. You must tell us everything. Hold nothing back." He pauses, looking at each of you in turn. When his gaze reaches you, you feel a small tremor run through your left arm, not entirely voluntary, but not entirely involuntary either. The line between acting and being continues to blur. "Who," he continues, "is tormenting you?" The silence that follows is pregnant with possibility. You can feel the adults in the room leaning forward, hanging on every breath. These are men who have spent their lives studying theology, debating the nature of good and evil, and now they're faced with living proof that their beliefs are real and immediate, and sitting right in front of them. Ann Putnam Jr. is the first to speak. "I see her," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "The tall woman with the red cloak. She's standing behind Reverend Parris right now, making faces at him." Everyone turns to look behind the minister, seeing nothing but empty air. Reverend Parris himself spins around, his eyes wide with alarm. "What does she look like?" asks one of the men. "You think it's Thomas Putnam, Anne's father." She's tall, with grey hair and a hooked nose. She carries a black book and she wants me to sign it. She says if I don't, she'll pinch me until I bleed." As if on cue, Anne lets out a small cry and clutches her arm. When she rolls up her sleeve, there are small red marks on her skin. The adults gasp and murmur among themselves. You watch this performance with admiration and a growing sense of competition. Anne has raised the bar considerably. It's no longer enough to simply shake or tremble. Now you need visible proof, physical evidence of supernatural torment. Abigail Williams goes next. She describes a short, stocky woman with wild hair who appears in her room at night, demanding that she renounce her faith. She brings other spirits with her, Abigail says, her voice growing stronger as she speaks. Dead babies, crying and reaching for me with their little hands. The image is so disturbing that one of the women in the room, Goody Walcott, actually faints. The men rush to revive her, while the girls watch with satisfaction. This is power, you realize. The power to make adults faint with nothing but words. Betty Parris, being the minister's daughter, takes a more restrained approach. She speaks of whispers in the night, of shadows that move independently of their owners, of a presence that fills her with a dread so profound she can barely breathe. Her performance is subtle, almost understated, but it's perhaps the most convincing of all because it relies on psychological terror rather than physical dramatics. And then it's your turn. All eyes are on you, waiting. You can feel the weight of expectation, the hunger for revelation. These people want to believe. They need to believe. Your trembling hand isn't enough anymore. You need to give them something more substantial, something that will secure your place in this exclusive club of the supernaturally tormented. You close your eyes and take a deep breath. When you open them again, you let your gaze focus on a spot just over the shoulder of one of the men in the room. Samuel Wilkins, a prosperous farmer who has never particularly liked your family. "I see her," you say, and your voice comes out in a whisper that somehow carries to every corner of the room. "The woman with the grey hair, she's here now." Ann Putnam Jr. sits up straighter. "Yes, that's her, the one with the hooked nose. She's holding something," you continue, building on Anne's description while adding your own details. "A poppet, a little doll that looks like me." You let out a small gasp and double over slightly, clutching your stomach. "She's sticking pins in it. I can feel them, like ice-cold needles in my belly." The effect is immediate and gratifying. Several of the adults jump to their feet, ready to help you. Your stepmother pushes through the crowd, her face pale with worry. "Mary, what can you see? Who is it? Who is doing this to you?" And here's where it gets interesting, because up until this moment, all of the girls have described their tormentors in vague terms. The woman with grey hair, the short, stocky woman, the shadowy presence. None of them have actually named names, but someone has to be the first, and you're beginning to realize that someone might as well be you. You let your gaze wander around the room, as if following the movements of an invisible figure. Your eyes settle on the corner near the door, and you speak with the conviction of someone who has just received a divine revelation. "It's Sarah Good," you say. The name drops into the silence like a stone into still water, creating ripples of shock and recognition. Sarah Good is one of the village's most obvious suspects, a beggar woman who goes from house to house asking for food and shelter, who mutters under her breath when she's refused, who has the kind of sour disposition that makes people cross themselves when she passes by. She's exactly the sort of person who would consort with the devil, mostly because she already seems to hate everyone in Salem Village. "Sarah Good," repeats Reverend Parris, and there's something like relief in his voice. A name. Finally, a name. Yes, you say, gaining confidence. She comes to me at night, and she wants me to sign her book. She says if I don't, she'll make me sick unto death. The other girls immediately begin to nod and murmur their agreement. Yes, they say, Sarah Good. That's who they've been seeing too. The tall woman with the grey hair and the hooked nose. It's Sarah Good. Within minutes, the room is buzzing with activity. Plans are being made. Warrants will be issued. Sarah Good will be arrested and questioned. Justice will be served. You sit back in your chair, watching the adults scurry around like ants whose hill has been disturbed. And you feel a satisfaction so profound it's almost physical. With 6 words, it's Sarah Good. You have set in motion a chain of events that will reshape the entire community. Later that afternoon, as you walk home through the village, you notice the change in atmosphere. People gather in small groups, whispering urgently. Doors that are usually left open are now firmly closed. Children are called inside earlier than usual. Salem Village has become a place where neighbours eye each other with suspicion, where every unexpected noise might be the devil's work. And you, Mary Warren, are at the centre of it all. That evening, your stepmother prepares your favourite meal, a luxury that was unthinkable just a week ago when you were nothing more than another mouth to feed. Your father asks about your day with genuine interest, hanging on every word of your account. They treat you like someone important, someone whose opinions matter. As you lie in bed that night, you think about Sarah Good, probably cowering in her hovel, unaware that her name has been spoken in the most powerful room in Salem Village. You wonder if she's guilty of anything more than being poor and unpleasant. You wonder if it matters. The tremor in your hand starts up again, and this time you're not sure if you're controlling it or if it's controlling you. But as you flex your fingers in the darkness, feeling the power that flows through them, you decide it doesn't matter. What matters is that tomorrow people will listen when you speak. What matters is that you are no longer invisible. Outside your window, the February wind carries the sound of distant voices, urgent and afraid. Or maybe that's just your imagination. But in Salem Village, the line between imagination and reality is becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish. And that's exactly the way you like it. You close your eyes and dream of grey-haired women and black books, of crowds hanging on your every word, of the intoxicating taste of power. And for the first time in your life, your dreams feel less like fantasies and more like prophecies. You wake up to the sound of chains rattling in the distance, which is either the most ominous alarm clock in Massachusetts or the sound of Sarah Good being dragged to the Salem Village meeting house for questioning. Given recent events, it's probably the latter. It's been a week since you first spoke Sarah Good's name, and the effect has been more dramatic than you could have imagined. The woman was arrested within hours of your accusation along with 2 other women. Sarah Osborne, a bedridden woman who rarely attends church, and Tituba, Reverend Paris's Caribbean slave, who had the misfortune of being both exotic and expendable. You've become something of a local celebrity. People seek you out, asking for your insights into the supernatural plague that has befallen Salem Village. Adults who previously wouldn't have trusted you to churn butter now hang on your every word as if you were delivering messages directly from the Almighty. This morning, you're expected at the meeting house for the preliminary examination of the accused women. It's your debut as a star witness in what is rapidly becoming the most important legal proceeding in the colony's history. No pressure at all. Your stepmother helps you dress in your finest clothes, which admittedly aren't very fine, but they're clean and only slightly patched. She braids your hair with unusual care and gives you a pewter cross to wear around your neck. For protection, she says, though you're beginning to suspect that you're not the one who needs protecting. The meeting house is packed beyond capacity. People have come from surrounding villages to witness the proceedings. They line the walls and crowd the aisles, creating an atmosphere that's part courtroom, part theatre, and part revival meeting. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, nervous sweat, and burning candles. At the front of the room, a long table has been set up for the magistrates. John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, 2 of the most respected men in the county, sit behind it like judges at the gates of heaven. They have the look of men who take their responsibilities seriously, which is both reassuring and terrifying. The accused women sit on a bench to one side, and the sight of them is almost anticlimactic. Sarah Good looks exactly like what she is, a homeless beggar woman whose life has been one long series of disappointments. Sarah Osborne appears frail and confused, as if she's not entirely sure how she ended up here. Tituba keeps her eyes downcast, probably wondering how being good at folk remedies and storytelling landed her in this particular circle of hell. You and the other afflicted girls are seated in a special section near the front, where everyone can see you and, more importantly, where you can see everyone else. Ann Putnam Jr. sits beside you, practically vibrating with excitement. Abigail Williams is on your other side, her face set in an expression of holy determination. The other girls are arranged around you like a choir of supernatural witnesses. Magistrate Hathorn calls the proceedings to order, and the room falls silent. "We are here," he begins, "to examine these women who stand accused of the detestable crime of witchcraft, of entering into covenant with the devil, and of tormenting innocent children with their spectres and familiars." He turns to look at you and the other girls. "Let the afflicted come forward and testify to what they have seen and suffered." This is your moment. You stand on slightly shaking legs. The tremor has become almost constant now, though you're not always sure if it's genuine or performed, and step forward. "I have seen Sarah Good," you begin, your voice carrying clearly through the packed room. "She comes to me in the night, accompanied by a tall man in black. They bring a book written in blood and demand that I sign my name in it. The crowd murmurs, and you can feel their attention like a physical force. It's addictive, this power to shock and horrify with nothing but words. Where I refuse," you continue, gaining confidence, "she pinches me and scratches me. She says she will kill me if I don't do her bidding." "Show us," commands Magistrate Hathorn. "Show us the marks." You roll up your sleeves, revealing the small bruises and scratches that you've carefully cultivated over the past week. They're not difficult to create. A pinch here, a scratch there, applied when no one is looking. The crowd gasps at the sight of them, and you feel a thrill of satisfaction. Ann Putnam Jr. steps forward next, and her testimony is even more dramatic than yours. She describes not just seeing Sarah Good, but being attacked by her spectre, lifted into the air and thrown against walls. As she speaks, she begins to convulse, her body twisting in ways that would be impressive if you didn't know she was doing it on purpose. "Look," Anne cries, pointing at Sarah Good. "She's sending her spectre to torment me now." And then something interesting happens. As Anne thrashes and screams, pointing at the accused woman, Sarah Good actually begins to defend herself. "I am innocent," she shouts, rising from her bench. "I have done nothing. These children are lying." The effect of this outburst is immediate and unfortunate for Sarah Good. The crowd roars in outrage. How dare she call you and the other girls liars? How dare she deny the evidence of her own evil deeds? But more than that, her denial triggers something in you and the other girls. As if responding to a prearranged signal, you all begin to convulse simultaneously. The effect is spectacular. 6 young girls writhing in apparent agony, all pointing at the same accused woman, all crying out in pain and terror. The magistrates are forced to restore order by banging on their table and shouting for silence. When the chaos dies down, Magistrate Hathorn turns to Sarah Good with an expression of grim satisfaction. "The evidence speaks for itself," he says. "Even now, in this holy place, you send your spectre to torment these innocent children." "I am innocent of witchcraft," Sarah Good insists, but her voice is lost in the crowd's anger. The examination continues for hours. Each of the accused women is questioned, and each time they deny the charges, you and the other girls respond with fresh displays of supernatural torment. It's like a carefully choreographed dance, except the stakes are life and death. Sarah Osborne, weak and confused, can barely mount a defence. She stammers and contradicts herself, which the magistrates interpret as evidence of guilt. The crowd watches her with the hungry fascination of people witnessing their own righteousness in action. But it's Tituba's examination that proves most interesting. Unlike the other 2 women, she doesn't deny the charges. Instead, she confesses. "Yes," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have seen the devil. He came to me and told me to serve him. The meeting house erupts in a mixture of horror and excitement. A confession. Finally, proof that the devil is indeed active in Salem Village. But Tituba doesn't stop there. She goes on to describe other witches in the village, people who attend the devil's meetings in the woods. She doesn't name names, not yet, but she makes it clear that Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne are just the beginning. There are others, she suggests, many others. As you listen to Tituba's testimony, you feel a chill that has nothing to do with the February weather. She's describing a conspiracy of evil that extends far beyond 3 unfortunate women. She's suggesting that the devil has established a foothold in Salem Village, and that anyone at all, could be part of his army. The implications are staggering and thrilling. If Tituba is right, then you and the other girls are not just witnesses to isolated incidents of witchcraft. You're the front line in a cosmic war between good and evil. You're not just accusers, you're heroes. When the examination finally ends, all 3 women are ordered to be held for trial. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne maintain their innocence, but Tituba's confession has sealed their fate. In the logic of Salem Village, if one of them is guilty, they all must be guilty. As the crowd disperses, you notice the change in atmosphere. People look at each other differently now. There's suspicion in their glances, fear in their whispers. If the devil can work through a beggar woman, a sick woman, and a slave, then who else might he be using? Who else might be secretly serving the forces of darkness? That evening, your family treats you like a returning war hero. Your stepmother prepares a special dinner, and your father actually smiles at you, a rare occurrence that makes the whole day feel worthwhile. They ask about the examination, and you regale them with carefully edited accounts of the day's events. You were very brave, your stepmother says, and you can hear the genuine pride in her voice. Standing up to those wicked women like that, it couldn't have been easy. It wasn't easy, you want to tell her, but not for the reasons she thinks. It wasn't easy to maintain the performance for hours, to keep track of which symptoms you were supposed to be experiencing at which moments, to coordinate your responses with the other girls without making it obvious that you were coordinating. But you don't say any of that. Instead, you nod gravely and accept their praise. You've earned it, after all. You've helped to expose the devil's work in Salem Village. You've struck a blow for righteousness and justice. As you lie in bed that night, listening to the wind howl through the bare trees, you think about the day's events. 3 women are now in jail, probably shivering in the cold and wondering how their lives went so wrong so quickly. Tomorrow, there will be more questions, more examinations, more opportunities to demonstrate your supernatural insight. You flex your fingers under the blanket and the tremor runs through your hand like a familiar friend. The line between performance and reality has become so blurred that you're no longer sure which is which. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're important now. What matters is that people listen when you speak. And if that requires a few more women to be dragged away in chains, well, that's the price of justice. The devil has made his move in Salem Village, and you're just responding in kind. You're not creating the crisis, you're solving it. The wind outside grows stronger, rattling the windows and carrying with it the faint sound of weeping. Or maybe that's just your imagination. In Salem Village, the distinction between reality and imagination is becoming increasingly irrelevant, and that suits you perfectly. You close your eyes and drift off to sleep, dreaming of crowded courtrooms and hanging crowds, of the intoxicating weight of being absolutely, completely believed. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate your unique connection to the supernatural world. And you can hardly wait. You wake up to the sound of your own breathing, which is oddly amplified in the pre-dawn darkness, as if the air itself has thickened with anticipation. It's been 3 weeks since the first examinations, and Salem Village has developed the atmosphere of a town under siege. Except the enemy is invisible, potentially anyone, and armed with supernatural powers that make conventional defences useless. The novelty of being one of the afflicted girls is beginning to wear thin, like a dress that's been worn too many times without washing. The initial thrill of attention and importance is still there, but it's now accompanied by a growing sense of expectation that sits in your stomach like poorly digested porridge. People don't just want you to identify witches anymore, They expect it. They need it. The spiritual health of the entire community depends on your ability to point your finger at the next servant of Satan. Your stepmother has taken to watching you with the intense focus of someone studying scripture, looking for signs of fresh afflictions. Your father asks daily about your supernatural encounters, and you can hear the disappointment in his voice when you report that the previous night was relatively spectre-free. Even the other girls seem to be experiencing more dramatic torments than you are, which creates a competitive pressure you never expected. Ann Putnam Jr. has become particularly adept at the theatrical side of the work. Yesterday she claimed that the spectre of Martha Corey, a respected church member, had appeared to her and attempted to choke her to death. Her performance was so convincing that half the women in the room started crying. You watched with a mixture of admiration and envy, taking mental notes for your own future performances. Abigail Williams has developed a specialty in biblical prophecy, claiming that God speaks to her directly and provides warnings about the devil's plans. This is a clever approach because it positions her as not just a victim of witchcraft, but as a chosen vessel for divine communication. You've been trying to figure out how to incorporate similar elements into your own repertoire without seeming like a copycat. The pressure to maintain your position among the afflicted has led you to make increasingly bold accusations. Last week you named Rebecca Nurse, an elderly woman so pious that even suggesting she might be a witch felt like blasphemy. But the crowd's reaction was everything you could have hoped for. Gasps of shock, urgent whispers, the delicious sense of having dropped a bombshell into the middle of polite society. This morning, you're expected at yet another examination. The makeshift courthouse has become your second home, a place where your words carry the weight of divine revelation, and your pointing finger can destroy lives with casual efficiency. It should feel more significant than it does, but familiarity has a way of making even the most dramatic events feel routine. You dress carefully, choosing the grey wool dress that makes you look appropriately somber and victimized. Your stepmother braids your hair loosely so that it will look dishevelled when you begin your convulsions. These details matter now. The performance has become sophisticated, requiring attention to costume and staging that you never anticipated. The meeting house is packed as usual, but there's something different about the crowd today. They watch you and the other girls with a mixture of reverence and wariness, as if you've become something more than human, but perhaps less trustworthy. You catch snippets of whispered conversations as you take your seat. Getting out of hand, too many accusations. What if they're wrong? For the first time since this began, you sense doubt in the room. Not about the existence of witchcraft, that's become accepted fact, but about the reliability of your supernatural insights. It's a subtle shift, but it sends a chill through you that has nothing to do with the February weather. Magistrate Hathorn calls the proceedings to order, and today's accused is brought forward, Bridget Bishop, a woman in her 50s who runs one of the village's few taverns. She's exactly the sort of person who would make an ideal witch. Independent, outspoken, and rumoured to have been married multiple times. She also has the misfortune of dressing more colourfully than most Salem women, favouring reds and purples that stand out like warnings in a sea of Puritan grey. Bridget Bishop, Magistrate Hathorn begins, you stand accused of the detestable crime of witchcraft. How do you answer? I am innocent, she replies firmly. I know nothing of witchcraft. It's the same response given by every accused woman, except Tituba. But something about Bridget Bishop's delivery is different. She doesn't sound frightened or confused. She sounds angry. And anger, you're beginning to realise, is more dangerous than fear. Let the afflicted testify, commands the magistrate. Ann Putnam Jr. stands first, as has become her custom. She's developed a sense of dramatic timing that would be impressive in a travelling theatre company. She begins with a low moan, building gradually to full convulsions while pointing at Bridget Bishop. She comes to me, Anne cries. She brings her familiars, black cats and yellow birds, and they torment me through the night. The crowd murmurs its approval, but you notice that the sound is less enthusiastic than it used to be. The novelty is wearing off for them too. Abigail Williams takes her turn next, describing visions of Bridget Bishop leading midnight ceremonies in the woods. She carries a black book, Abigail says, and forces others to sign it with their blood. I've seen the signatures. There are many names already written there. This is a clever touch, suggesting not just that Bridget Bishop is a witch, but that she's recruiting others. It keeps the conspiracy theory alive and ensures that there will be more examinations, more opportunities for the afflicted girls to demonstrate their supernatural insights. When it's your turn to testify, you feel the weight of expectation more heavily than usual. The crowd is waiting, but their attention feels different, more critical, more evaluative. You can't just repeat what the other girls have said. You need to bring something new to the performance. You stand slowly, letting your left hand shake visibly. "I see her, Spectre," you begin, your voice carrying the authority of supernatural revelation. "But she's not alone. There's a man with her, dressed in black." This gets the crowd's attention. A man suggests that the conspiracy extends beyond the women who have been accused so far. It opens up entirely new possibilities for future accusations. He whispers in her ear, you continue, gaining confidence as you see the audience leaning forward. He tells her to recruit young girls, to corrupt them before they can mature into proper Christian women. The implication is clear and horrifying. Witches are targeting children. The crowd erupts in outraged murmurs, and you feel the familiar rush of power that comes from commanding their emotions with nothing but words. But then Bridget Bishop does something unexpected. Instead of cowering or protesting her innocence, she looks directly at you and speaks in a voice that carries clearly through the crowded room. "Child," she says, "I know not what you mean. I am innocent of witchcraft. But I wonder, who has taught you to lie so convincingly?" The question hits you like a physical blow. The crowd falls silent, shocked by the directness of the accusation. No one has ever suggested that you might be lying. The possibility has been unthinkable. Children don't lie about being tormented by supernatural forces, and certainly not with such consistency and detail. But Bridget Bishop has just made the unthinkable speakable. She's planted a seed of doubt that you can see taking root in some of the faces around you. A few people are looking at you with expressions you haven't seen before. Not reverence or fear, but skepticism. You respond the only way you know how, with a performance so dramatic that it overwhelms any possibility of rational thought. You let out a scream that echoes through the meeting house, a sound of such pure terror that several people jump to their feet. You collapse to the floor, your body contorting in ways that would be impossible if you were conscious and in control. "She's sending her spectre," you cry. "It's choking me, I can't breathe." The other girls immediately join in, creating a chorus of supernatural anguish that drowns out any possibility of further questions about your honesty. Ann Putnam Jr. begins speaking in what she claims is the devil's own language, a gibberish that sounds foreign and threatening. Abigail Williams falls into convulsions so violent that two men have to hold her down. The effect is overwhelming. The crowd's skepticism evaporates in the face of such obvious supernatural torment. Bridget Bishop is shouted down when she tries to speak again, and Magistrate Hathorne orders her to be silent. "The evidence speaks for itself," he declares. "Remove the accused from the sight of these innocent children." As Bridget Bishop is led away, you gradually allow your convulsions to subside. The crowd watches with the intense fascination of people who have just witnessed a miracle, or possibly its opposite. You let yourself be helped to your feet, accepting the concerned ministrations of the adults around you with appropriate gratitude. But as you straighten your rumpled dress and accept a cup of water to soothe your supposedly tormented throat, you catch sight of a face in the crowd that makes your blood freeze. It's Goody Proctor. Elizabeth Proctor, your former employer, and one of the few adults who has ever treated you with genuine kindness. She's watching you with an expression you've never seen before. Not fear, not reverence, not even skepticism. It's something worse, disappointment. The look of someone who has trusted you and is beginning to suspect that trust was misplaced. The examination continues for another hour, but you're distracted by the weight of Elizabeth Proctor's gaze. She doesn't speak, doesn't challenge your testimony, doesn't do anything that could be interpreted as disruptive. She just watches. And somehow that's more unsettling than any direct confrontation. When the proceedings finally end, Bridget Bishop joins the growing population of Salem's jail, She's been condemned by your testimony and that of the other girls, just as Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne and Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse and all the others have been. The system works with ruthless efficiency. Accusation leads to examination, leads to imprisonment, leads to, well, you try not to think too hard about what comes after imprisonment. As the crowd disperses, you find yourself face to face with Elizabeth Proctor. She doesn't speak immediately, just studies your face with those thoughtful brown eyes that seem to see more than they should. "Mary," she says finally, "are you well?" It's a simple question, but it carries layers of meaning that make you uncomfortable. She's not asking about your physical health or your supernatural afflictions. She's asking about something deeper, something you're not sure you want to examine too closely. "I'm well, Goody Proctor," you reply carefully. "The Lord protects me from the worst of the torments." She nods slowly, but her expression doesn't change. "I'm glad to hear it," she says. "And I hope you're able to find peace soon. This must be very difficult for someone so young." There's kindness in her words, but also something that might be a warning. Or maybe that's just your imagination. These days you're not always sure what's real and what's performance, what's genuine concern, and what's veiled threat. That evening, as you sit at your family's dinner table, your father asks about the day's examination with his usual mixture of pride and curiosity. You give him an edited account, emphasizing your role in exposing another servant of Satan, while downplaying the moments of doubt you witnessed in the crowd. "You're doing God's work," he tells you solemnly. "This village owes you, and the other girls, a debt that can never be repaid." You nod and accept his praise, but Elizabeth Proctor's face keeps appearing in your mind. The disappointment in her eyes, the careful way she chose her words, the sense that she sees through the performance to something underneath that even you don't fully understand. As you prepare for bed, you catch sight of yourself in the small mirror that hangs on your bedroom wall. For just a moment, you see yourself as Elizabeth Proctor might see you, a 13-year-old girl playing a game that has gotten far more serious than anyone intended. The face looking back at you doesn't look like a holy warrior in the fight against evil. It looks like a child who has stumbled into something too big and too dangerous to control. But then you blink, and the moment passes. You are one of the afflicted girls. You are a witness to supernatural evil. You are important and necessary and absolutely crucial to the spiritual welfare of Salem Village. People depend on you. God himself has chosen you for this work. You lie down in your narrow bed and close your eyes, but sleep doesn't come easily. Instead, you find yourself thinking about all the women now sitting in Salem's jail, shivering in the cold, and wondering how their lives went so wrong so quickly. You think about the fear in their eyes when they looked at you, the desperation in their voices when they proclaimed their innocence. And you think about Bridget Bishop's question, "Who has taught you to lie so convincingly?" The answer, you realize with a clarity that's both illuminating and terrifying, is that no one taught you. You taught yourself. And the student, it turns out, has become disturbingly proficient at the subject. Outside your window, the March wind carries the sound of voices. Urgent, fearful, angry. Or maybe that's just your imagination. In Salem Village, the line between imagination and reality has become so blurred that it might not exist at all. And that, you're beginning to understand, might be the most dangerous magic of all. You pull the blanket up to your chin and try to sleep, but your dreams are filled with disappointed faces and pointed questions and the uncomfortable weight of truths you're not ready to acknowledge. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new accusations, new opportunities to demonstrate your supernatural insights. But tonight, for the first time since this all began, you're not entirely sure that's what you want. You wake up to the sound of silence, which is somehow more ominous than any scream or rattle of chains. Salem Village has developed the peculiar quiet of a place where people have learned to watch their words, where casual conversation has become a potentially lethal activity. Even the roosters seem to crow more cautiously these days. It's been 2 months since your first accusation, and the jail is now overflowing with suspected witches. Men, women, and even children crowd the dark cells, awaiting trials that everyone knows will end in only one of 2 ways: confession and public humiliation, or denial and death. The mathematics of Salem justice have become brutally simple. You've become something of a professional witness, testifying at examination after examination with the practiced ease of someone who has found their calling. Your performances have grown more sophisticated, incorporating elements of theatre, theology, and pure psychological manipulation that would impress the most seasoned travelling actor. You know exactly which gestures will provoke gasps from the crowd, which phrases will send the magistrates reaching for their Bibles, which accusations will generate the most satisfying explosion of public outrage. But success has brought its own complications. The other afflicted girls have begun to compete with you for attention, each trying to outperform the others in displays of supernatural torment. Ann Putnam Jr. has developed a signature move where she claims to be lifted into the air by invisible hands. Abigail Williams has started receiving direct messages from angels, complete with prophecies about the devil's future plans. Even quiet Betty Paris has learned to convulse with such convincing terror that grown men weep at the sight of her suffering. The competition has pushed all of you to make increasingly dramatic accusations. It's no longer enough to identify servants and outcasts as witches. Now you're naming respected members of the community, people whose guilt seems impossible, but whose destruction is correspondingly more satisfying. Rebecca Nurse, the elderly saint of Salem Village, sits in jail because of your testimony. Martha Corey, a pillar of the church, awaits trial because Ann Putnam Jr. claimed to see her spectre dancing with the devil. And now there are whispers that some of the accused are starting to crack under the pressure. Tituba's confession opened the floodgates, and others are beginning to follow her lead. They're confessing to witchcraft, and, more importantly, naming their supposed accomplices. The web of accusations grows larger and more complex each day, spinning out in directions that even you couldn't have anticipated. This morning brings news that makes your stomach clench, with something that might be excitement or might be fear. The first execution has been scheduled. Bridget Bishop, the tavern keeper, whose direct challenge to your honesty almost derailed your entire performance, has been tried, convicted, and sentenced to hang. In 3 days, Salem Village will hold its first witch execution in living memory. Your stepmother delivers this information over breakfast with the same tone she might use to announce a church social. "They're building the gallows on Gallows Hill," she says, ladling porridge into your bowl. "The whole village will attend, of course. It's important to witness justice being done." You nod and murmur appropriate agreement, but your hands shake as you lift the spoon to your mouth. Not the theatrical tremor that has become your trademark, but genuine trembling born of the realization that your words, your lies, if you're being honest with yourself, have led directly to this moment. In 3 days, a woman will die because you pointed your finger at her and claimed to see her spectre. The weight of this knowledge sits in your chest like a stone, making it difficult to breathe. You've been so focused on the immediate rewards of your performance, the attention, the importance, the power, that you've managed to avoid thinking too seriously about the ultimate consequences. Jail was abstract, removable. Death is permanent. But there's no backing down now. To admit that you've been lying would be to confess to the most serious crime imaginable, bearing false witness in matters of life and death, undermining the entire legal and spiritual foundation of the community, making a mockery of justice itself. The punishment for such deception would make hanging seem merciful. Besides, you tell yourself as you struggle to finish your breakfast, maybe Bridget Bishop really is a witch. Maybe your supernatural insights are genuine, even if you've embellished them for dramatic effect. Maybe God is working through you in ways you don't fully understand, using your performances to reveal truths that exist beyond conscious knowledge. It's a comforting thought, but it rings hollow even in your own mind. That afternoon, you're summoned to another examination. John Proctor, Elizabeth's husband, who has made the mistake of publicly questioning the validity of the witch trials. His skepticism has marked him as a potential ally of Satan, and several of the afflicted girls have begun to report spectral visits from his ghostly form. You arrive at the meeting house to find it even more crowded than usual. Word of Bridget Bishop's impending execution has created a fever of excitement that draws people from miles around. They pack the building with the eager anticipation of theatre-goers waiting for the curtain to rise on a particularly scandalous play. John Proctor stands at the front of the room, flanked by constables. He's a large man, powerfully built from years of farming, and he carries himself with the dignity of someone who has nothing to hide. But there's something in his eyes, a mixture of anger and resignation, that suggests he knows exactly how this examination will end. Magistrate Hathorn calls for order and begins the proceedings with his usual formal language about detestable crimes and supernatural torments, but you barely hear him. Your attention is fixed on Elizabeth Proctor, who sits in the front row of spectators, her face pale but composed. She watches you with the same disappointed expression you remember from Bridget Bishop's examination, and suddenly you understand why her husband has been accused. John Proctor has been questioning the trials. Elizabeth Proctor has been watching you with skeptical eyes. Together, they represent a threat to the entire structure of accusations and examinations that has become your life's work. They must be neutralized, and since witchcraft accusations are the only tool available, witchcraft accusations they shall receive. Ann Putnam Jr. testifies first, describing how John Proctor's spectre appeared to her and demanded that she sign his black book. Her performance is polished and convincing, complete with visible bruises that she claims were inflicted by his ghostly hands. The crowd murmurs its approval, and Magistrate Hathorn takes careful notes. Abigail Williams follows with an even more dramatic account. She claims that John Proctor's spectre not only tormented her physically, but also showed her visions of other witches in the village, people whose names she will reveal when God gives her permission to do so. It's a clever performance that promises future revelations while establishing her credentials as a prophet of divine justice. And then it's your turn. You stand slowly, letting your trademark tremor run through your left hand. The crowd falls silent, waiting for your testimony with the hungry attention of people addicted to supernatural drama. You can feel the weight of their expectations, the pressure to deliver a performance that will satisfy their craving for righteous outrage. But as you look at John Proctor, this man whose only crime was questioning whether 13-year-old girls should be trusted with matters of life and death, something inside you rebels. For just a moment, you see him not as a witch or a threat or an obstacle to your importance, but as a human being whose life hangs in the balance of your next words. You begin and then stop. The silence stretches uncomfortably. The crowd leans forward, eager to hear what revelations you'll provide. The other afflicted girls watch you with expressions of curiosity and concern. Magistrate Hathorn raises an eyebrow, waiting for you to continue. "I see his spectre," you finally say, but your voice lacks its usual conviction. "He comes to me and..." You trail off again, unable to complete the lie. In the front row, Elizabeth Proctor watches you with something that might be hope flickering in her disappointed eyes. But then Ann Putnam Jr. saves you from your moment of weakness. "Look," she cries, pointing at John Proctor. "He's sending his spectre to stop Mary from testifying. He's choking her." It's a brilliant improvisational move, and you seize on it gratefully. You clutch your throat and begin to make choking sounds, as if invisible hands are cutting off your air supply. The crowd erupts in outraged exclamations, and several men jump to their feet, ready to defend you from supernatural attack. "Remove the accused from the sight of this innocent child," shouts someone from the back of the room. But John Proctor doesn't wait to be removed. Instead, he turns to face the crowd directly, his voice carrying clearly through the chaos. "These children are lying," he says simply. "They're pretending to be afflicted, and you're all fool enough to believe them." The words hit the room like a thunderbolt. For a moment, even your pretended choking subsides as you stare at him in shock. No one has ever spoken so directly, so bluntly, about the possibility that you and the other girls might be deceiving the entire community. The crowd's reaction is immediate and violent. Shouts of outrage fill the air, and several men move toward John Proctor as if they intend to attack him physically. But his words have been spoken, and they hang in the air like smoke from a fire that can't be easily extinguished. You resume your performance with renewed vigor, determined to overwhelm his accusation with the sheer force of your supernatural torment. The other girls join in, creating a cacophony of screams and convulsions that drowns out any possibility of rational discussion. By the time order is restored, John Proctor's fate is sealed. He's condemned not just by your testimony, but by his own words. In the logic of Salem Village, only a witch would claim that the afflicted girls are lying. Only someone in league with Satan would try to undermine the community's efforts to root out evil. As he's led away to join his wife in jail, for Elizabeth Proctor has also been accused, her skeptical watching finally earning her a place among the condemned, you feel a hollow victory that tastes like ash in your mouth. That evening, you sit at your family's dinner table and listen to your father praise your courage in standing up to John Proctor's supernatural attacks. Your stepmother fusses over you, checking for new marks or bruises that might indicate fresh torments. They treat you like a hero returning from battle, and you accept their attention with the gratitude of someone who knows she doesn't deserve it. But later, as you lie in your narrow bed listening to the wind rattle the windows, you find yourself thinking about the faces of the accused. Not their spectral forms, but their human faces, confused, frightened, desperate people whose lives have been destroyed by your pointing finger. Bridget Bishop will hang in 2 days. Rebecca Nurse awaits trial. Martha Corey sits in a cold cell, probably wondering how a lifetime of faithful service to God led to accusations of serving Satan. John and Elizabeth Proctor face charges that will almost certainly end in death. And you, Mary Warren, are the architect of much of their suffering. You close your eyes and try to sleep, but your dreams are filled with disappointed faces and pointed questions and the uncomfortable weight of truths you can no longer avoid. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new accusations, new opportunities to demonstrate your supernatural insights. But tonight, for the first time since this all began, you're not sure you want to wake up to see what you've become. The girl who once craved attention and importance has gotten both in abundance, and the cost is becoming too terrible to calculate. Outside your window, the wind carries the sound of hammering from Gallows Hill, where carpenters work by moonlight to build the platform where justice will be served. Or maybe that's just your imagination. In Salem Village, the line between imagination and reality disappeared long ago, taking with it any hope of return to innocence. You pull the blanket over your head and try to block out the sound, but it echoes in your mind long after silence falls. Tomorrow, the machinery of justice will turn another revolution, and your lies will claim another life. And there's nothing you can do to stop it now, except lie still and hope that dawn never comes. You wake up to the sound of your own crying, which is both embarrassing and oddly appropriate. It's October now, and the leaves outside your window have turned the colours of dried blood and dying fires. 8 months have passed since you first spoke Sarah Good's name, and Salem Village has become a place where neighbours eye each other with the constant suspicion of people living in a war zone where the enemy could be anyone. 19 people have been executed as witches. 19. The number sits in your mind like a physical weight, pressing down on your thoughts and making it difficult to concentrate on anything else. You can recite their names like a litany of the damned. Bridget Bishop, Sarah Good, Sarah Wilds, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Rebecca Nurse, Marta Carrier, George Jacobs Sr., John Proctor, George Burrows, John Willard, Martha Corey, Mary Easty, Alice Parker, Mary Parker, Anne Pudator, Wilmot Red, Margaret Scott, Samuel Wardwell. 19 people who woke up on their execution days just as you're waking up now, never imagining that the sun setting that evening would set on their corpses swaying from Gallows Hill. The witch trials have taken on a momentum of their own, spinning far beyond anything you could have anticipated when you first let your hand tremble in front of your concerned parents. What began as a desperate bid for attention has become a machinery of death that operates with terrifying efficiency. Accusation leads to examination, leads to trial, leads to execution, with the predictability of a water wheel grinding grain into flour. But something has changed in recent weeks. The new governor, William Phipps, has begun to express doubts about the validity of spectral evidence, the ghostly visions that form the foundation of most accusations. More importantly, people are starting to question whether the afflicted girls might be unreliable witnesses. The unthinkable is becoming thinkable. Maybe you've been wrong. Maybe you've been lying. Maybe innocent people have died because a group of attention-seeking girls got carried away with their own importance. Your stepmother no longer asks about your nightly visitations with the same eager interest she once showed. Your father's praise for your supernatural insights has become perfunctory. delivered with the tired tone of someone going through the motions. Even the other afflicted girls seem to have lost some of their enthusiasm for the work. Ann Putnam Jr. still performs when called upon, but her convulsions lack their former conviction. Abigail Williams has taken to having headaches that prevent her from attending examinations. The truth is that Salem Village has grown tired of its witch crisis. The initial excitement has worn off, replaced by a wary recognition that the cure might be worse than the disease. Too many respected citizens have been accused. Too many families have been destroyed. Too many questions have been raised about the reliability of testimony from children who might be motivated by factors other than divine revelation. This morning brings news that makes your already churning stomach clench with fresh anxiety. The trials are being suspended. Governor Phipps has ordered a halt to further executions while the validity of spectral evidence is reviewed by learned theologians and legal scholars. The machinery of death that has defined your life for the past 8 months is grinding to a halt, leaving you and the other afflicted girls in an increasingly precarious position. Without the trials to justify your importance, what are you? Without the constant drama of examinations and executions, who will pay attention to a 13-year-old girl with nothing more interesting to offer than the ability to mend socks and churn butter? You dress slowly, choosing the plain brown dress that marks you as just another village girl rather than a chosen vessel of supernatural revelation. Your stepmother watches you with the careful attention of someone monitoring an invalid for signs of relapse. But her concern feels different now, less reverent, more worried about what you might do or say that could bring unwanted attention to the family. "Mary," she says as you sit down to breakfast, "Goody Putnam stopped by yesterday while you were resting. She wanted to know if you've had any recent afflictions." The pause before resting is telling. You've been spending more and more time in bed lately, claiming exhaustion from your supernatural battles, but really just trying to avoid the increasingly skeptical stares of your neighbours. The village that once treated you like a holy warrior now looks at you with expressions ranging from pity to suspicion to barely concealed anger. "Nothing significant," you reply, which is the truth. Your spectral visitors have become remarkably quiet lately, probably because even your imagination has grown tired of manufacturing supernatural encounters. Your father looks up from his Bible, still the only book in the house, still the only acceptable reading material for a proper Puritan family. "Perhaps," he says carefully, "the Lord has seen fit to grant you some peace. Perhaps your work in exposing the devil's servants has been sufficient." There's hope in his voice, the desperate hope of a man who has realized that having a supernaturally afflicted daughter is more complicated than he initially thought. The prestige of being the father of one of the chosen witnesses has been offset by the growing social pressure from neighbors who have begun to question whether the chosen witnesses might be unreliable. You nod and murmur agreement, but inside you feel a growing panic. If your afflictions end, if you return to being just another village girl, what will you have left? How do you go back to anonymity after 8 months of being the center of attention? How do you resume a normal life when you've been responsible for the deaths of 19 people? The walk to church that morning is an exercise in social navigation that would challenge a diplomat. People who once sought you out now avoid eye contact. Conversations stop when you approach, resuming in hushed whispers after you pass. Children who once stared at you with awe now peer at you from behind their mother's skirts with expressions of fearful curiosity. The service itself is a lesson in the art of collective forgetting. Reverend Paris, whose daughter and niece were among the first afflicted, preaches about forgiveness and the dangers of false accusations, without once mentioning the trials that have dominated village life for the past 8 months. It's as if the entire community has agreed to pretend that the recent unpleasantness was just a particularly vivid nightmare that everyone happened to share. After the service, you find yourself standing alone in the churchyard while families gather in small groups to discuss the weather, the harvest, and anything else that doesn't involve supernatural persecution. For the first time in months, you're invisible again, and the sensation is both liberating and terrifying. "Mary?" You turn to find Elizabeth Proctor standing behind you. She's thinner than you remember, aged by months in jail, and the trauma of watching her husband hanged for crimes that existed only in the imaginations of adolescent girls. But her eyes still carry that same disappointed kindness that has haunted your dreams since her arrest. "Goody Proctor," you say, your voice barely above a whisper. "I'm glad to see you well." She nods, studying your face with the same thoughtful attention she once brought to evaluating the quality of her wool. "Are you well, Mary? Truly well?" It's the same question she asked months ago, but now it carries the weight of everything that has happened since. She's asking about more than your physical health or your supernatural afflictions. She's asking about your soul, about the cost of the choices you've made, about whether there's anything left of the girl she once knew. "I don't know," you answer honestly, and the admission feels like confession. She reaches out and touches your arm gently, the first kind gesture you've received from an adult in weeks. "I pray that you will be," she says simply. "God forgives much, Mary, but we must be willing to seek forgiveness." She doesn't wait for a response, just nods and walks away to rejoin her surviving family members. But her words echo in your mind as you make your way home through streets that no longer feel familiar, past houses where neighbours no longer wave in greeting. That afternoon you sit in your room and try to understand what your life has become. 8 months ago you were a desperate girl who wanted nothing more than to be noticed, to be important, to have adults listen when you spoke. You got everything you wanted, and the cost has been higher than you could have imagined. 19 people are dead because of lies you helped to tell. Dozens more have had their lives destroyed by accusations you helped to make. An entire community has been torn apart by suspicions you helped to plant. And now, as the machinery of persecution winds down and people begin to ask uncomfortable questions about how it all started, you find yourself facing a future that holds nothing but the weight of undeniable guilt. Your stepmother calls you for dinner, but you can't imagine swallowing food that would have to share space in your stomach with the knowledge of what you've done. Instead, you lie on your narrow bed and stare at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of village life continuing around you as if nothing has changed. But everything has changed. The girl who once craved attention now dreads it. The girl who once felt powerful now feels helpless. The girl who once believed she was fighting on the side of righteousness now knows she has been an agent of something far darker. As darkness falls, you hear the sound of wind through bare branches, carrying with it the rustle of dead leaves and the distant echo of voices that might be real, or might be the product of a guilty conscience. Somewhere in that wind, you imagine you can hear the whispered names of the 19 who died, calling out in accusation or perhaps in forgiveness. You close your eyes and try to sleep, but rest no longer comes easily. Your dreams are filled with disappointed faces and pointing fingers and the uncomfortable weight of truths you can no longer avoid. When you do sleep, you dream of Elizabeth Proctor's gentle question, "Are you well, Mary? Truly well?" Then you wake each morning knowing that the answer is no, you are not well, you may never be well again. But perhaps, if you're very lucky and very careful and very brave, you might someday learn to live with what you've become. The wind outside grows stronger as winter approaches, rattling the windows and carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of long, dark nights ahead. You pull the blanket up to your chin and try to find a position that doesn't ache with the weight of memory, but comfort seems as distant as the innocence you lost somewhere between your first trembling hand and your 19th corpse. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new questions, new opportunities to confront the consequences of choices made by a girl who wanted nothing more than to be important. And you will face them because you must, because there is no other choice, because the alternative to living with guilt is not living at all. But tonight, you lie awake in the darkness and listen to the wind carry its cargo of whispers and regrets, and you wonder if there will ever be enough tomorrows to balance the weight of yesterday's choices. The clock on the mantelpiece chimes midnight, marking another day in a life that has become an exercise in endurance rather than living. You count the chimes like a rosary of regret, each one marking another hour since the last execution. Another step away from the girl you were and toward whatever you're becoming. Outside your window, Salem Village sleeps fitfully, a community trying to forget its recent fever dream of supernatural persecution. But forgetting, you're learning, is a luxury reserved for those who were not at the center of the storm. For you, memory has become a permanent resident, setting up housekeeping in the corners of your mind, where it whispers its inventory of sins with the persistence of a tax collector. 19 names, 19 faces, 19 lives. that ended because a group of girls learned that the most dangerous magic of all is the power to make adults believe whatever you tell them. You close your eyes and try to summon sleep, but instead you find yourself wondering about the children who will grow up in the Salem village you helped to create. Will they learn the story of the witch trials as a cautionary tale about the dangers of superstition? Will they understand that sometimes the real monsters wear the faces of ordinary people seeking extraordinary attention? Or will they simply learn, as you have learned, that power is intoxicating and consequences are inevitable, and that the line between victim and victimizer is often drawn in pencil rather than ink? The wind dies down to a whisper, and finally, mercifully, you drift off to sleep. But even in your dreams you can hear the gentle voice of Elizabeth Proctor asking her impossible question. Are you well, Mary? Truly well? And somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, you think you might finally have an answer. No, you are not well, but you are alive, and as long as you are alive, there remains the possibility of becoming something better than what you have been. It's not much of a hope, but in Salem Village, in the year of our Lord 1692, it's enough to carry you through until morning. The clock chimes 1, and you sleep at last, dreaming of forgiveness that may never come, and redemption that feels as distant as the stars. But tomorrow will arrive regardless of your dreams, and with it will come new opportunities to choose who you want to be rather than who you have been. And perhaps, if you're very lucky and very brave, that will be enough. Well, dear listeners, thank you for staying with us through this particularly charming bedtime tale of adolescent ambition gone spectacularly wrong. I do hope you've enjoyed this soothing journey through one of America's most infamous cases of what happens when adults decide that 13-year-old girls are reliable witnesses to supernatural crime. Sweet dreams. Now, because apparently some people prefer their history with actual facts rather than the gentle psychological horror we've just served up, here's what really happened in Salem Village between 1692 and 1693. You know, just in case you were wondering whether any of this delightful chaos actually occurred. The historical reality behind your bedtime story. In February 1692, 9-year-old Betty Parris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams, daughter and niece of Salem village minister Samuel Parris, began experiencing what can only be described as supernatural tantrums. They screamed, threw things, contorted their bodies into impossible positions, and claimed to see invisible tormentors. Dr. William Griggs, working with the medical sophistication of someone who thought bloodletting cured everything, diagnosed witchcraft, because obviously, the girls initially refused to name their supernatural assailants, but under considerable adult pressure, and possibly some coaching, they eventually pointed fingers at 3 women who were convenient targets. Sarah Good, a homeless beggar who had the audacity to mutter when refused charity, Sarah Osborne, an elderly invalid who rarely attended church, and Tituba, Reverend Parris's Caribbean slave, who had entertained the local children with folk tales and fortune-telling. The preliminary examinations began on March 1, 1692, presided over by magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne maintained their innocence, which was clearly suspicious behaviour that only proved their guilt. Tituba, however, confessed to meeting the devil and implicated the other 2 women, probably because she understood that confession was her only path to survival. Her detailed testimony about devil's meetings and flying through the air on sticks electrified the community and established the template for future accusations. More girls began experiencing afflictions, including 12-year-old Ann Putnam Jr., 17-year-old Mercy Lewis, and our protagonist Mary Warren, who was actually around 20 years old and a servant in John Proctor's household. The circle of the afflicted expanded to include Elizabeth Hubbard, Susanna Sheldon, and others, creating a chorus of supernatural witnesses whose testimony would prove devastatingly effective. The accusations spread like wildfire through a community already strained by political tensions, property disputes, and social hierarchies. Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old grandmother renowned for her piety, was accused in March. Martha Corrie, another respected church member, followed shortly after. The net widened to include people from neighbouring towns, creating a regional crisis that attracted attention from Boston and beyond. John Proctor, Mary Warren's employer, made the fatal mistake of publicly questioning the girls' credibility, suggesting they were poor, distracted children whose testimony shouldn't determine life and death. This skepticism earned him his own accusation, along with his wife Elizabeth. The Proctor's arrests demonstrated that no one was safe from suspicion. Wealth, reputation, and religious standing provided no protection against accusations of witchcraft. By May 1692, the jails were overflowing with accused witches. Governor William Phips established a special court of oyer and termina, meaning to hear and determine, with Chief Justice William Stoughton presiding. The court accepted spectral evidence, testimony about ghostly apparitions visible only to the afflicted, as valid proof of guilt, essentially making conviction inevitable. Bridget Bishop became the first to hang on June 10, 1692, executed on what became known as Gallows Hill. She was followed by Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Rebecca Nurse, and Sarah Wilds on July 19. 5 more died on August 19. Martha Carrier, John Willard, George Jacobs Sr., George Burroughs, a former minister, and John Proctor. On September 22, the final execution day, 8 people were hanged. Martha Corey, Mary Easty, Alice Parker, Mary Parker, Ann Pudata, Wilmot Redd, Margaret Scott, and Samuel Wardwell. Giles Corey, Martha's husband, suffered a different fate. Refusing to enter a plea, he was subjected to peine forte et dure, being slowly crushed under heavy stones until he agreed to stand trial. After 2 days of this medieval torture, he died without confessing, allegedly saying only "more weight" when urged to confess. The crisis finally began to unravel when accusations reached too high into society. When the afflicted girls accused Lady Mary Phips, the governor's wife, William Phips, suddenly developed serious doubts about spectral evidence. Prominent ministers, including Increase Mather, published criticisms of the trial's methods. The tide of public opinion turned as people realized the accusations had spiraled beyond any reasonable bounds. In October 1692, Governor Phips suspended the Court of Oyer and Termina and forbade further arrests. A new Superior Court of Judicature was established in 1693, which refused to accept spectral evidence. Most remaining prisoners were acquitted or pardoned, though some died in jail from the harsh conditions of their imprisonment. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The afflicted girls faded into historical obscurity, their moment of terrible prominence ending as abruptly as it had begun. In 1697, the Massachusetts General Court declared a day of fasting and repentance for the tragedy. In 1711, the colony restored the rights and good names of those accused, providing financial compensation to their families. Ann Putnam Jr. publicly apologized in 1706, claiming she had been deluded by Satan. The other girls never offered public apologies, disappearing into the anonymity of colonial life. Samuel Parris was eventually forced out of his ministry, and many of the magistrates expressed regret for their roles in the trials. In total, 19 people were executed, 1 was tortured to death, and at least 4 died in prison. Approximately 150 people were accused, and the crisis fundamentally changed how colonial America viewed the intersection of law, religion, and evidence. So there you have it, the factual framework beneath our fictional bedtime story, because sometimes reality is even more disturbing than any narrator's imagination could devise. Sleep well.